Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I guess I will go ahead and get us started. So for folks who are joining us for the very first time, I want to introduce our SCT Innovation X Roundtable very quickly. So SCT stands for Supercharger Center of Entrepreneurship and Technology. We fall under UC Berkeley's College of Engineering. And our mission here is really to empower innovators to positively change the world. And we do this through educating students to use Berkeley method of entrepreneurship in our challenge labs, which allows students to develop professional skills and entrepreneurial mindsets, as well as behaviors. And additionally, we engage in innovation engineering through technical projects with a particular expertise in areas of data, blockchain, deplastify, and alternative meats. And with that, we are really excited to launch this session today focused on future of work. In fact, we have a number of classes centered around this topic, especially now that we're still amidst the pandemic and seeing a lot of changes. But this panel in particular, we will definitely focus on digital transformation, emerging technologies, and automation. And I'm really excited to introduce to all of you our four panelists for today. We're really in for a special treat. We have not only Berkeley and Stanford alumni among us, but we also have numbers of entrepreneurs who are really passionate about the topics that we'll be covering today. So without further ado, love to get everyone to introduce themselves and give you all better context into their backgrounds, hopefully without dogs in the background. So maybe we'll do ladies first, and we'll start with Anna, please.
Hi, my name is Anna Shedletsky. I am CEO and founder, one of the two founders of Instrumental. I'm a mechanical engineer by background. I did go to Stanford, don't hate me for it. Started my career at Apple, where I was a product design lead on a handful of iPods and then the first generation Apple Watch. So if you have one of those, we kind of paved the ground for that first generation product. And realized while I was at Apple that finding and fixing issues in manufacturing, particularly in electronics manufacturing, is really, really hard. And engineers like me get deployed to solve those problems. And so actually started Instrumental about 7 years ago today. Actually, I started literally 7 years ago yesterday, the company. And we've raised about $80 million. And we help electronics companies, mostly multinational brands like Bose and Cisco Meraki, companies like that, find and fix issues in their manufacturing processes, which saves them a lot of money because 20 cents of every dollar spent in manufacturing is wasted.
Thanks so much, Anna. Eurus, please, love to hear your story as well.
Great, thanks, Shel. Hi, everyone. My background, I went to Michigan, go Blue. Also actually as a mechanical engineer. I have a bunch of other degrees across computer science, applied math, and aeronautics, astronautics. I spent about 7 years working at Boeing on the 787 Dreamliner about 15 years ago, working on the first sort of fully carbon fiber commercial aircraft and all the sort of engineering physics, simulation software, and high performance computing that came along with that. About 10 years ago, started a company called Rescale. I'm still CEO at Rescale. And what we do is provide sort of the platform we wish we had at Boeing to help engineers and scientists to run these complex physics simulations faster. Anything from, sort of discrete physics of, say, car crash simulations to propulsion systems for rockets to computational drug discovery, to the design of computer chips. And so we have a broad set of customers across sort of the Fortune 500, and we provide a cloud platform that helps empower the engineers sort of that sit within R&D to accelerate innovation and perform sort of the digital transformation that most companies aspire to achieve.
Awesome, welcome, welcome. And Ryan, who is a fellow Berkeley alumni.
That's right, go Bears. A little bit about myself. My name is Ryan. I went to Cal Berkeley as a chemical engineer. My first job was actually working in a manufacturing plant, saw how bad technology was. Everything was desktop based. But if you work in a manufacturing plant, you realize that there are very few people that ever sit in front of a desk. So started this company called Upkeep, wound up teaching myself how to code. The entire inspiration behind it was build better software that technicians out in the field who'd never sit in front of a desk can use to make the days, lives, and jobs easier for them to go home on time and to eat dinner with their family. So I started the company about 6 years ago. Over the past 6 years, grown a bunch, raised about $50 million in venture, 150 people based down here in Los Angeles. It's beautiful here, and absolutely love it. But yeah, it's been a really awesome, fun journey. It's my full-time role, and really glad to participate in today's conversation around the future of work. It's very near and dear to my heart.
Welcome back. And last but not least, Rodeo.
Hey everybody, I am Jodio. I'm the founding CEO of Armory. Armory is about 5 years old now, a company that is commercializing an open source project out of Netflix and Google to help large enterprises deliver software faster and more safely. So big companies like JP Morgan Chase typically think they have to choose between moving fast and breaking things on the one hand, and on the other hand, never innovating and only releasing code maybe quarterly. But the reality is, if they make an investment in a continuous delivery platform, they're able to get both. And being able to get ideas out into the world as code with safety and velocity is mattering a lot more than it ever has before. So Armory enables that. We've got customers like a large watch manufacturer in Cupertino, for example, JP Morgan Chase, Snap, and others. I also am the founder of Founder Culture. Founder Culture is a passion project. It's something I wish I had when I was first starting. And it's effectively a group of about 250 founders that include early stage founders as well as scale up founders. And the goal is to get the knowledge and really the scar tissue out of the heads of those of us that have been through the gauntlet and into the hands of first time or early stage founders. So I will post a link about Founder Culture in the notes here. I'm also posted a link with a collaborative document that we can all take notes around, and I'll put a bunch of links in there as we talk. And I welcome anyone to take notes with me.
Awesome. Thanks so much. I think Rodeo is the best at taking notes, sharing tweets, and all of that stuff from what I've seen. And I guess lastly, brief self-introduction, which I should have done earlier. My name is Shwo Chen. Full-time, I'm a general partner at IOVC, where we focus on investing in early stage B2B enterprise SaaS startups, powering the future of work. Had the fortune of investing in a number of the startups ran by awesome founders here. And then outside of that, have also been teaching entrepreneurship on the faculty at UC Berkeley. In fact, a lot of our speakers are invited back by popular request. Many of them have lectured for my classes, and students are always passionate about hearing more in this space. So really excited to have you all here today. Maybe we could start with the consistent theme that's shared by all of our speakers so far. I mean, you've all talked about similar experiences of wanting to build what you wish you had back then. And a lot of the students now are just starting to really wrap their minds around what opportunities there are out there. So it would be great to hear your thoughts on what does the future of work mean to you? What does digital transformation mean to you? How do you define these terms? And what do you see as the most exciting opportunities in this space? Maybe we'll start with Rodeo.
Yeah, so I actually have a really quick question, and I always love to know what people want to get out of any panel or session that I'm in. And for Jennifer and Keith, if you're up for just posting in the notes, what is the number one thing that you hope to get from this time today? I would love to know the answer to that question. So as we talk, we can make sure that it's viable for you. So maybe that's my first opening comment. So to answer your question, we're just in this really massive shift from analog to digital, with all things, and COVID has just made that happen so much faster. So I think there's actually a pretty untapped opportunity in the fact that we have a digital layer in between all of us these days, like even right now. And we're all feeling the pain of that, like the great resignation. And even when employees aren't resigning, they're just less motivated. It's hard to create shared context and shared culture in distributed settings. And we haven't yet. So we're dealing with the pain, but we haven't yet really unlocked the possibilities and the value. And I'll just give you one crazy idea. But on many of the Zoom calls that I'm on, there's just as many bots on the calls as there are humans. And these bots are like Firefly and Scribe and Otter. And they're basically, people are sending their bots when they can't go to meetings. This is happening a lot in meetings that I'm in. And so we're starting to be able to capture a lot of the content that is being spoken by us as analog beings, but we're not doing anything with it. It's all just going into these like repositories that never get looked at. Same thing with like gong sales calls from large enterprise sales teams. Imagine the possibilities where we're not just all introducing each other for the first time, but each of us is getting a lot of deep context about the people that we're interacting with, because there's a digital system that's giving us that context. It all exists. It's just not being compiled and given to us in ways that humans can make use of. I just think there's so many opportunities to create more context than has ever existed before with this digital pane that's between us. And we're not really taking advantage of that yet. So lots of opportunities. When I think digital transformation, that's the first thing that I think about.
Such a great point, Rodeo. And also to answer your earlier question, something kind of as a teaser for everyone towards the end that we definitely want to tackle, but of course we can also talk about this earlier, is how we can bridge the gap between academia and industry. What can we do as an academic institution at UC Berkeley to better prepare students that we're sending out into the world who want to be entrepreneurial, whether as founders themselves or joining startups? So hopefully that sets a stage for a lot of our conversation. But of course, for everyone who's on this call, I know we have about 40% students, 40% peers from the industry, and about 20% faculty members. So if anyone has a question or topic that they want to cover that we haven't yet covered by any time, really, you're welcome to ping that in chat, and we'll make sure to get to that during our session together. So maybe we'll go backwards then. So Rodeo, we'll move back to Ryan.
A lot of people have different definitions of what the future of work means. It could mean anything from like, us being on a Zoom right now and how it used to be us sitting in front of a group of 100 people on stage. It could mean, moving a migration from physical data centers into the cloud. For me, I'll take a little bit of a different spin on it. I think at least for me, our industry, I think about our this digital transformation, the future of work as it relates to like, the physical industries like manufacturing, and how it really changes jobs from being in the physical world into this digital world. So something that we often talk about, and I think is kind of a very unique thing with manufacturing, is this idea around digital twins. If you don't know what it is, it's really, really interesting. It's this idea of creating a digital replica of the physical world, so you can essentially run simulations. So when I think about digital transformations, it's literally like, how do we take the physical world and put it into the digital world so that we can actually like run simulations without actually having to stand next to a piece of equipment. But again, it means a lot of different things to different people in different industries. That's one way I think about it. What do you all think?
Love it. Speaking of simulations, I'm sure Yuris has a lot to say.
Yeah, I'll chime in there. That sounds, I have a similar view on like what's a pretty exciting area, specifically in some of these, deeper, more technical domains that if you take some simulation as an example, or the creation of this like digital twin example for building rockets or things like that, the time of development and the amount of innovation that can happen sort of increases exponentially if you can do it all in software. Good example where that hasn't really happened yet is in life sciences, drug discovery. So it's still like sort of 95% done in labs. It used to be that airplanes were designed that way too. And people would just build stuff, test it, and then go back to the lab and build a better sort of model. But now that's all done in software, right? And so I think you're going to see in a lot of these like sort of physical manufacturing industries a pretty rapid shift towards more software-driven approaches. And then another interesting trend there is like there's obviously the sort of digitization of things, but there's also the use of AI, which we might have to get into defining what that exactly is, but generally a lot of the science and engineering fields get very specific and quite complex. I'm sure there's a lot of PhDs in different topics sort of joining us today. But I think our goal and an area I think is pretty interesting for new companies to be started as well is how do you take that sort of specialty expertise and try to embed that within software, as opposed to having humans have to sort of do all that work. And from my experience at Boeing, you got hundreds of thousands of engineers, both at Boeing, but also through the supply chain, working on one big, very complex project. There's many ways to improve how that gets done, and you could probably eliminate like 90% of the humans in that, which allows these people to go work on more interesting, better projects, right? Which I think generally is a very good thing. And so this whole trend towards digitization and these digital twins and simulation, I think is a very exciting space. I think it's maybe a little bit over marketed at the moment with the metaverse and everything else going on. But I think that is the future of, of engineering. And I think that's a pretty exciting trend. And so when it comes to also new students looking at starting companies or entrepreneurial ventures, I generally would recommend always look at something that's changed pretty drastically. And right now, this digital transformation has created a whole new set of opportunities. And if you start a new company now, relative to something started 3 years ago, would already be pretty different in what problems companies have and what there is to solve. So whenever there's a lot of change, there's a lot of opportunity for new entrepreneurial ventures. So now is a great time to start a company.
There's so many pieces there, including the right time to start a new company. We'll definitely come back to that in a bit. But before we move on, Anna, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this space as well.
Yeah, I would maybe offer an analogy of kind of what's happening. So like a decade ago, it was actually kind of people built software and they had developer environments to do that. And they built these apps, and those could maybe produce some logs, but like nobody was really grabbing that data, doing much with it. You'd have infrastructure and data centers that you'd have to physically go into the data center, figure out what's going on. And then this huge market of all sorts of like data related tools having to do with your software was born. And there's big companies in that market like Datadog and Splunk and Sumo Logic, and like all these companies that are actually grabbing this data that's kind of latent in the development, not just in the development of the software, but when the software is running, all these logs, and then harnessing useful information out of that data. And that's been like a decade happening. And that's kind of the tip of the spear, because I think software developers build tools for themselves. And like in some of these physical industries, you kind of hear, you've got some panelists that, have degrees in physical stuff, mechanical engineering, chemical engineering. And it kind of takes like that understanding of that visceral pain to be like, oh, we need to build software for these people too, because like the software engineers don't even know what our problems are. And so the same thing is kind of happening in the physical industries now. So like we're literally like we're actually probably 2 decades behind, maybe more. Ryan is nodding his head. Yeah, it's pretty latent. We work in a similar space, so we kind of have similar facts. But ultimately, COVID has been an amazing accelerant to the physical, unsexy industries, because suddenly like these are very conservative kind of industries where they don't want to like rock the boat too much. Like it's working. They'd rather like the devil they know than like, something that like could cause a lot of chaos, and COVID caused a lot of chaos. So then it was just like Band-Aids and, painkillers was what was needed. And so there's been an acceleration of this market towards digital transformation in physical industries. I'm talking logistics, I'm talking manufacturing, where there's like very physical components that need to move in physical space. So you can't like totally get rid of the atoms, like they're there. And that's happening. And it's very exciting because all of the dumb things, and I say dumb and mean it, that like I used to do as an engineer, like I'd literally sit on a plane for 12 hours to go figure out what's going on in a factory. Like, how is that like efficient or good? And now we're not, like at the beginning of the pandemic, they were trying to replace some of the like inefficient things they were doing with just digital versions of that. Now it's wide open. It's how are you going to solve these problems? You can start with a clean slate. And so we're seeing all of this latent data that's developed in the supply chain for the manufacture of products is strong and powerful, but we're at like the ground floor. Like even just getting access to this data today is thumb drived and emailed like around the world. Do you even know what a thumb drive is? Like there are probably people in the room who've never even seen a thumb drive. Like that's how data is getting moved around. And so there's like really interesting, like even super basic problems around ground level access to this data that we know is valuable, and then layering on algorithms and AI and intelligence, like others have talked about, where the actual pieces of the work can be done by machines, because machines are great at looking at a lot of data. Like, humans should not look at a million images of something and try to make sense of it. That's not how our brains are wired, but machines are really good at that. And so I think there's a lot of opportunity for similar analogs across some of these physical industries that are happening right today because of the acceleration of COVID, kind of breaking enough stuff that people realize, okay, we can start with a clean slate.
Anna, I'm like nodding my head so much at you because I feel the same way. Like, you know, the entire premise behind Upkeep was like working in a manufacturing facility, realizing like, oh my God, all of our software is desktop based. Like no one ever
Windows
sits
95.
no one ever sits in front of a desk working in a manufacturing site. So like I'm nodding my head so much. And you know, Jordi, to one of your points, like what is one of the main goals here? If one of the main goals here is like, what is the next billion-dollar company to be made? There is so much untapped potential here in this like unsexy industrial space.
Trillion-dollar companies could be made in these industries because they are so big.
Where we are right now is like 10 years, 20 years, to your point, Anna, relative to like a lot of consumer tech businesses in like industrial factories. So massive untapped potential. That doesn't mean go build competitive products to ours, just throwing it out there. There's a lot of other stuff you can build, I'm sure.
Big cheese. It's a big cheese.
I'm so excited to chat more about this because a ton of students are really passionate about not just becoming entrepreneurs, but even if they work in a larger company, being entrepreneurial in those roles. And I feel like each of you have touched on different pieces of this opportunity. Is there anything that really stands out to you? And to Anna's earlier point, it's true. Many of the audience members here, especially if they're students, probably haven't ever seen a thumbnail before. But you have to keep in mind that we have grad students, but the undergrads are almost all born post 2000, right? So this is a very different generation of students. So how do we prepare this future generation coming into the workforce now for this new world of opportunities?
Can I just maybe mention one thing, just because I'm going to have to go in 5 minutes? I'm so sorry I can't stay the whole time, but I'll just I'm very passionate about the beginning part of the journey for founders, and I just put a bunch of resources into the shared doc. Let me try to also paste them into the notes here. But I think the number one thing that I see from especially first-time founders is that they fall in love with solutions instead of falling in love with problems. And it is so incredibly important as a founder. I mean, being a founder is a long journey. It's a marathon, not a sprint. And there's going to be ups and downs, and there's going to be time for maybe years when nobody cares. Nobody cares what you're doing, because to be a founder, by definition, you're doing something that other people think is a little bit crazy, or else they would have done it themselves. So by definition, if you decide to go create a company to go solve a problem instead of working somewhere, you're just not doing things that those around you think is the smart or easy path. And so it's just incredibly important to fall in love with the problem. And I always tell people, you shouldn't start a company unless you can't not start it. You've got something an idea in your head. You think about it in the shower every morning, and there's this problem that you just like isn't solved, and you think that it should be. And there's a process to go start a company. There's a really good book called Lean Customer Development I highly recommend, that talks about the process of going and interviewing the personas that you think have this problem. When we started Armory, we interviewed 100 people. These are not like quick phone calls. These are hour-long phone calls. And we tried to understand what's broken right now. What are the problems that they need solving? Where are the patterns? You'll start to see patterns as you do this at scale. And it's so incredibly important to be prepared for that journey and to love being on it, because it's so hard, but it's so rewarding as well. So fall in love with the problem, not the solution. Go talk to a lot of people and figure out, people will always know their pain. They'll think they know the answer to the pain. Your job is to translate that pain into a scalable answer that probably looks a lot different than they think it does.
I totally resonate too with that, Jordi. Like, find what the problem is, not the solution. And I feel like a lot of early stage founders, even myself, I come out of school thinking like, all right, I've experienced the world. I've gone through college. Like I've seen everything. Like there's so many problems that I see. And then what I realized stepping foot, working in a manufacturing facility, like getting my first time job, like my like knowledge of the world is still like so tiny. And what at least what happened for me when I worked my first job working in a manufacturing site, like I saw a million other problems that I don't think I would have ever gotten the opportunity to get exposure to had I not like gone to work at a manufacturing site. And so maybe like the, I don't know, TLDR here is like, I know we've all got this like entrepreneurial spirit, but don't fall in love with the solution. Fall in love with what the biggest problem is. And having that mindset is so important when you're thinking about like starting your first company and starting a startup.
And on that note, if you're falling in love with a problem, it likely also means that you have to put yourself into situations where you're running into real world problems, because a lot of what happens at school doesn't necessarily expose you to that. So Drodio, I know you have to run in a minute, but maybe in this last minute, I could get you started talking about how can we here at Berkeley get students better prepared for this transition into working in the industry, whether they're being a founder themselves or applying their entrepreneurial energies in another capacity.
Yeah, so I think the number one thing about being a founder is thinking a little bit differently than maybe those around you are thinking. And a lot of times it's about seeing opportunity that others around you don't see. And I always say that it's important as a founder to start from yes, and then work backwards to figure out how to get there. And there's a lot of ways that you can kind of force that for yourself. I have this belief that the best founding team is a hacker and a hustler. And so it's a little different based on whether you're the hacker or you're the hustler. If you're the hacker, then just being really involved in side projects, like interesting side projects that are using new technologies, is a really great way to like meet incredible people that are doing progressive things, to see problems in new ways. So, just like really being curious. If you're a hustler, the number one thing that I recommend is that you just put yourself in uncomfortable situations. Here's a really easy example. Every time you buy something, ask for a discount. It's so uncomfortable. It's so anti-culture to ask for a discount every time you buy something. But by doing things like that, you start to realize that sometimes it'll work. It's just math. Like it's some percentage of the time you'll get the discount. But not being afraid to do that extra thing that other people aren't doing. It's so easy. Like we leave such just like blessed lives. It's so easy to just kind of like be on the train and like everything is paid for. There's not a lot of problems in our lives. It's like being in third world countries where like everything's broken all the time. So like put yourself in uncomfortable situations, whether you're being really curious or you're just learning to be a hustler.
Yeah. I mean, one common quote that goes through my mind is like, everything was once impossible until it wasn't. Right. And so it's like this mentality of to your point, Drodio, it's start with yes. Imagine a world where it is actually possible and work your way back from that. What I often tell our team is that, as an early stage startup, there are a bunch of other competitors in our space. And I'm sure, for everyone else here on this call, I'm sure you have tons of competitors. What I say to our team is that we don't have more money, time, resources, people, experience than any of our competitors out there that have been around for decades, that have billions of dollars in market value, literally billions of dollars on their balance sheet to go fund and potentially destroy us. The only thing that we have on our side is, one, the belief that we can, two, the ability to move fast, quickly iterate, and be better than we were yesterday. And with that mentality, I think, again, we can really accomplish anything that we set our minds to.
Love that. Thanks so much for joining us, Rodeo.
Right.
And yours, want to jump to you as well. Any thoughts to add here? I love the heated discussion, so anyone can jump in anytime.
No, I think you're totally right. I would read, I'm sure is in the references that Rodeo provided, but Paul Graham's written a lot of really good essays on how to get started. how to grow companies, but especially on the early stage. And Y Combinator is a great place to get lots of resources. They put most of their material out there for everybody to see. So that's a great place to get started. Or joining an early stage company can also be a great way to get exposed to what it's really like before you jump in sort of full speed ahead. But maybe the last thing I'll add is I don't think starting a company is a kind of unnatural thing to do. So there's never a perfect time. You should, I do think you should only really do it if you feel like that's the only thing you can do. There's a lot of other things that are much more comfortable in life and will be good alternatives. But I think to build a successful company, you have to be super mission driven and be willing to sort of have the grit and resilience to stick it out for like 10 years. So, you shouldn't do that on a whim. You should be pretty sure that that's actually what you want to do.
So one thing I've noticed that we all have in common as panelists here is that we all like worked kind of in the space and experienced the problem firsthand as like workers of the problem, and frankly, probably user personas, which is like the people we sell to today. That's all that means. It's a fancy word for people who use the products that we now make today. And I think that there's a trade-off there, because there's certainly folks who actually my husband is also a CEO of a company, of a similarly sized company, Berkeley alum. And yet, well, Berkeley dropped out of school to start a company. So he has the opposite experience as I do, but I find that like having worked in a company and seen like what work is like and how companies work, and also to get exposure to like problems companies have and how do companies make decisions and what does this landscape really look like and what do these people with these job titles really do, has been an incredible accelerant to our ability to build a product that we think, our ability to build a product that people want and people like and people buy more of. And I think a unique perspective on how we've been able to get traction in a market that is littered with the bodies of like failed companies, including the billion dollar companies who've also kind of kept away from our particular market. So I would say that getting some firsthand experiences of actually being in these companies and being in a company in a space. And so if you're interested in a space, go work in a company, get a job, get like the most painful job you could find, or a job maybe you're interested in, and maybe you get the spark from that. I was thinking back because Shwol, you mentioned like, how could you be entrepreneurial in a larger company? Like, it's not just about all starting companies. You can be entrepreneurial in a larger company. My first job out of school was at Apple. It's a very large company. And it's a company that gives you a lot of ownership very early on, like at probably an irresponsible amount of ownership. I was 20 years old and running a factory of like 40,000 people in it, on a program that was a flagship program for, the company. Way too much responsibility, but that responsibility then creates opportunities to grow and to do things. So like one of the things I really thought we could do better, I'll put it that way, is that it's very inefficient to build these products. We wasted a lot of stuff. And I remember being an engineer, like designing the size of like a protective film and being like, the number of these are going to fill a stadium. Like, and I can like make it a millimeter smaller and it doesn't matter how much I recycle in my lifetime. Like I am like doing a crime against the earth right now by designing this little like release liner tab. And made me feel like, oh, well, like maybe we could use some of that plastic waste and regrind to build post-consumer recycled content parts. Like maybe some of our parts could be recycled plastic. And we were not doing that at Apple at the time. And I am a very small engineer. Like I have no power in this huge organization. And I was like, I want to use regrind on a part. And so I just like started specifying like regrind on parts. I had to validate them. We had to go through an engineering process, make sure it was good. But like now we're pulling plastic out of the waste stream process. And I think that's kind of aligned with the story, your dots connect looking backwards, like around efficiencies. And so I was being entrepreneurial in Apple, thinking about our inefficiencies in physical waste, and ultimately left to build a software product to think about inefficiencies of both time, money, economic waste, broader amounts of waste. So I think there's absolutely ways to find companies where they embrace their employees to have great ideas. And Apple is certainly one of those companies. I'm sure there are many more. I just don't know about them.
And in fact, Anna, it's such a great way of structuring this framework, because one of the most common questions I get from students is whether or not they should look into diving full time into a side project that they're working on now and running that startup full time, or they should go work for a larger company. So it really depends on whether or not they're seeing demand and customer traction right now that really warrants moving forward. So looking back to all of your early days, at what point in time did you really feel like you were onto something? And then how did you go about starting it? Whether it's because you were in a full-time job and had the opportunity to try it out within the company, or it was a lot of hacking and hustling on your own. At what point in time do you realize this is the right time to start this thing?
So I think I have an unusual story, but I'll share it regardless because life is unusual. So I was very happy at Apple, actually, and probably am not the kind of person who ever imagined being an entrepreneur. I'm very like safe, and like being an entrepreneur is the opposite of safe. So like I'm a very safe person. I seek safety in what I do. Like I like that. I like things to be controlled and organized. I'm very type A. And I had a personal tragedy happen in my life about a year before Apple Watch was announced. So we're like deep in the project. Nobody knows it exists yet. And it made me reevaluate completely, absolutely everything that I was doing in my life. And I decided that building objects of art was not enough. I felt like Apple Watch, great product, but like that's an object of art. Like it doesn't really move the needle on humanity or the world, or justify my small existence and future consumption of of resources on this planet. And I felt like, well, what do I know something about? I was like, well, I know how to build millions of things. I know how to build them at really high levels of quality, but I also know why that's hard. And that was the kind of the pursuit that took me essentially to leave Apple, great company to work for, left Apple to really kind of pursue in this very narrow time window where I had no fear to start a company, because what's the worst thing that could happen when you've had the worst day of your life? So I did that, and fear grows back. So now that I'm like 7 years in, there's still the fear is back. But at this point, we have traction, we have customers, like we are helping, we can see it in the responses from our customers that what we're doing is meaningful. So that's not exactly probably the angle that you were going for, but that's the true story of how I kind of started the company, was really in a search for meaning and impact. And really wanted to solve a problem that I felt if we successfully solved it, like the earth would be a better place, and also businesses would be a better place. So in that like very small overlap between what's good for business and what's good for like the future of humanity on this planet, I felt like it was in here in this small space.
Thanks so much for sharing such a personal story, Anna.
Yeah. So Anna, you mentioned, life is unusual, and I totally agree with that. I was going to bring up my story too. And what I was going to say is like my story of when I jumped into entrepreneurship was also very unique and different. But I think what I realized is everyone's story into entrepreneurship is unique and different. For me, I actually worked a full-time job while building upkeep on the nights and weekends. Did that for about 2 years before I took the leap, Shuo, and said, all right, today's going to be the day I'm ready to quit my job. Because to your point, like entrepreneurship is one of the scariest things, one of the most risk-taking things out there. And when I look back, what I realized, it was kind of two things. One was it actually took me having lunch with one of my friends from high school that said, hey, Ryan, I believe in you. You should quit your job. So it actually was this external factor telling me that like, okay, cool. Like someone else is telling me they believe in me. I should probably believe in myself. And then the second thing that kind of gave me the confidence was, doing it over the past 2 years, grinding it out. It was never like a rocket ship over those 2 years. It was grinding every single freaking day. And it wasn't until that day I had coffee with my friend, and he said, Ryan, look how far you've come. When you grind every single day, it goes from like 1 user, 2 user, 3 user, 5, 10. It's never this like rapid acceleration, exponential growth that every single TechCrunch article has, at least not for us. It was grinding for 2 years. And then one day, someone turning you around and saying, look how far you've come, and realizing like, oh my gosh, done a lot over the last 2 years. It's kind of like that belief having someone else to believe in you, that believed in me. There's never the perfect time, and everyone has such a unique, different story.
And Eurus, love to hear you share as well.
Sure. For me, like everyone else has shared, everyone has their own unique story. I think for me, it was, ultimately with Rescale, was solving a lot of these problems I experienced at Boeing. I do think that without some experience, it would be really hard from the outside in to sort of build. I'm in the enterprise software space, so the way large companies do things is very hard to understand without having seen that sort of yourself. I think for me it was kind of around. I think somebody wrote a nice book about this, but autonomy, mastery, and purpose are probably the three most important things that sort of keep people happy, regardless if you want to start a company or work somewhere. And I think it's really important to provide those things for both yourself, but also if you're starting a team or a company, that you provide that for all your employees. And we aim to do that at Rescale. But for myself, that was, at Boeing, I had a lot of, I got to work on some of the most exciting engineering projects, but I was also, unlike Apple, maybe pretty fed up with like what working at a big company is like, and all the sort of process and paperwork. And aerospace is not the most like fast moving industry, certainly not at that time. And so as a young engineer, there were definitely lots of things that I thought could happen a lot faster. And then I think life is just really short, right? So I actually think most people live their life as what they think other people expect from them to do, whether it's your parents or people around you or your peers. I think at a certain point, I just realized, look, I personally, I'm really interested in a certain set of technologies, and I think certain things have certain potential. And I started sort of just doing what I thought would be most interesting to me and fulfill sort of this autonomy, mastery, and purpose for myself in my own career. And that led to leaving Boeing, doing an MBA, working at McKinsey. And as I uncovered certain things, I changed my path a little bit because certain things, seemed really nice from the outside, but were a little different from the inside. And then at a certain point, I just couldn't let go of this idea I'd been working on for, at that point, in both academia and in industry for over 15 years. And really started the company because I couldn't find any other place to go work on that problem that I thought would be really impactful and meaningful. And that's, and so that's how I started. And it was a very, it was a very tough path. I think when you read, like you shared, Ryan, I think if you read TechCrunch, everything sounds pretty good. But it can be very hard. And I actually don't know of a single founder that hasn't, with their company, gone through some really couple of years of really hard times. And I think,
right?
Everyone goes through this struggle. It's a good book, Hard Thing About Hard Things, that talks about that. But it's very hard. And so I would only embark on that path. If you think you're in it for the glory or the money or whatever else, those are probably not the right reasons to start a company. And if you actually look at a lot of very successful companies, they're usually started out of these like random things that happen. Like I think the WhatsApp founder was like rejected from every software engineering job in the Valley. And so then they decided to start a messaging company. So a lot of times they have these sort of, it is not a normal thing to go start a company. And so it does take a little bit of this artificial push into something a little bit irrational. Most founders are pretty irrational, actually. But I will say now, 10 years later, after having founded a company, I think it is the most meaningful work for sure, that and most rewarding. Very hard, a lot of time, but from a just pure work perspective, I think is like, and it's hard to know what the alternatives were, but can be extremely meaningful to fulfill this sort of autonomy, mastery, and purpose.
Absolutely, and really appreciate all of you sharing. And I think that is a really natural point for us to talk about some of the toughest challenges, because there's obviously a ton of exciting opportunities that you see every day as a founder. But what would be some of the toughest challenges throughout this journey that perhaps we can better prepare our students for now?
Too many.
I'm sure there's way too many. It could be something recently that you're working on. Oh, sorry, Anna, please.
I was just gonna maybe say, like, I think I'm trying to think of generalized advice that I feels like it will probably be very general to regardless of what direction you go in. I think learning how to learn new things, learning how to do jobs that you never thought you would need to learn how to do, so that you could learn enough about those jobs so that you could hire people who are way better at it than you. And learning how to build and tap into a network of people who can provide advice for free and often like with goodwill. I think those are kind of core pieces. I know when I came out of college, the whole, like, I kept being told, you need to go networking. And I was like, what is networking? Like, what is, like, is it, I don't know, I'm kind of an introvert. So that was like a weird thing. And when I started the company, everybody I knew was at Apple. So that's like not the best network to start a company with. And so I think these kind of softer skills around networking and like meeting people and building relationships that can be helpful and mutually beneficial. I think negotiation is not something that's taught, at least wasn't taught in my engineering coursework. I think if you go to B school, you can learn about it, but there's other ways to learn about negotiation. You don't have to go to B school to do that. You just take the class. Berkeley has a great class at the Haas School of Business on negotiation. I recommend it. I've taken it. So like negotiation is an area that's really helpful. I think I, as an engineer, kind of undervalued expertise in sales and marketing for quite some time, and until I just had to grind that myself for so long, that I was able to like finally find the right people who really can accelerate your company when you get big enough that you get to get executives. But like you have to work for so long before you earn the right to hire like amazing executives for your company. And so I think just being able to learn new things, be curious, and be excited about the journey of learning new things is a core preparation.
Yeah, I mean, some of the hardest times, I would say, it's kind of like the hiring, the firing, people leaving to go start their own startup that are so critical to the business. It's probably not super relatable to everyone right now and right here, though. But those are some of the most challenging parts of building a company. What I would say that might be a little bit more relatable to everyone here as a big challenge and struggle is this idea of going against the grain. When you're first starting out a company, you're gonna like go pitch your idea, go sell your idea to tons of people, and there's gonna be so many times where you're gonna be told that's a dumb idea, can't be done, that's impossible. It's just a lot of people have tried it and have failed, and you're gonna have to be the one to say, I believe that I can. You're going to be the one to say, I'm going to go against the grain on what everyone is telling me, trust my instinct, and go run into the fire that everyone is warning me not to. And I would say that those are some of the most difficult times, especially in the beginning of a company stage, because you're on a little island by yourself and you don't really have so much like support from, customers. You don't have revenue. For me, my mom was telling me, what are you doing, Ryan? But what I always think back and say is like, I mean, if this was such an obvious, great idea, someone would have already done it before. And so I don't know, like maybe what I'm trying to say is like, that's what you can expect. And that there's this fine line between, being crazy for running into that burning home and coming out alive or dead. And I don't actually really have any advice, to be honest, of where that fine line is. Yours, what do you think?
I think I think you're right. I think it's you have to be mostly, I think people will give you lots of advice, right? In the end, you have to sort of follow what you believe. And I think the best entrepreneurs listen to what a lot of other people say, but are pretty stubborn in what they believe to be true. And you have to be sort of contrarian and right if you want to find a good opportunity, right? Otherwise, like you said, everybody be doing it. We'll say timing matters a lot. So the critical part of a good fundraising pitch or starting a company is this sort of like, why now? And ideas are very cheap and easy, right? And so the same good ideas get tried all the time, but timing matters a lot. And entrepreneurs nor investors probably know ideal, like what is actually the right timing. Instacart being a good example, right? Like has been tried many times, and then at a certain point that worked. I think there's most ideas are being tried all the time. I think it's like from Mark Andreessen or something like that, but it's just like picking timing is actually the really hard part. Like most smart people are going to work on something interesting that's solving a real problem. But the timing can be pretty rough. I can tell you, speak for Rescale, we were definitely very early to market. We thought, high performance computing, supercomputing kind of stuff would move to cloud within a couple of years. And now I'm here like 10 years later. Basically, we're like 15% in cloud, right? And I thought it would have been like 95% by now. So, but I think if that gets to sort of grit and resilience, if you're willing to stick it out sort of irrationally, which I would say is somewhat irrational, for long enough, right? If you're willing to commit to something for 10, 20 years, most people are totally not willing to commit to something for 10 years, period, right? Like most marriages probably don't even last 10 years. So it's like, I think if you really care about the mission and the purpose of what you're doing, that's kind of what keeps you going through those times. But like you said, I think it's hard to provide advice because it's sort of like, you have to be somewhat irrational. If you just sort of listen to what everybody else says, you're probably going to be wrong. If you don't listen to what other people say, you just follow yourself, you're probably going to be wrong. So you kind of have to find the right mix. That's maybe the best I got. I think sales, Anna, you brought up sales. I think that's a very important one. There's a question in the chat about soft skills. I would say one thing I've learned is, I don't think I ever took a sales class, but selling, ultimately most companies are going to be, built by a bunch of employees. And people really matter a lot, right? And people are not, you have an amazing market opportunity and product, et cetera, but the only way you can build a great company is through great people. And so soft skills and sales is like very, very critical because in the world of sales, people buy from people. And if you actually look at what an entrepreneur does all day, it's just selling all day long, right? So whether it's like convincing somebody to join your company, and once you have enough good people, then it's convincing people not to leave, like Ryan said, or start their own companies. Convincing customers to buy your product, convincing investors to invest in your company. Just everything is basically sales, right? And it's, I think the easiest way to learn it is actually just to go do it, right? And some of the best salespeople come from, the very non-traditional places. I don't think it's something that you can really study in school. I think it's really something to just go do. But there's definitely jobs you can take that are pure sales jobs and are very hard. There's great training grounds for that. I do think getting experience in sales and selling to people is something that most people who have these sort of engineering, technical, introverted backgrounds are not naturally going to be attracted towards. And getting uncomfortable and building out that skill set can give you a big advantage. And it's really critical to be a good entrepreneur, I think.
I think that's a really great point, Iris. I would even add, like, I think there's ways to do that in school as well. If I look back on my, like, one of my superpowers is being able to get in front of a group of people and I think this is one of my superpowers, but I hadn't put that together with the selling skills. And I was a science fair kid. I did science fair all throughout high school. I was pitching since I was 12, pitching my research, pitching work that I'd done. And I think that there's lots of ways inside, in a school environment, to find opportunities where you have to sell your work. whether that's, presenting, like viewing presentations as opportunities to really exercise those muscles of like creating a well-formed argument, prepare this whole idea that you could like prepare for a meeting and like think through, I'm going to say this. What are they going to say? They're going to say this. Okay, then what do I say? Like to me, this is like mind blowing that you could like actually think that through and come up with like your chess plan for your meetings. So there's like all sorts of stuff that I, like had I learned earlier, I think you can practice these skills in school. Certainly real world experience like cannot be replaced as well, but like there's proving grounds already in the academic environment to kind of exercise these sales skills.
So Anna, I love your personality. Two, I want to learn a little bit more about what your science fair projects were when you were growing up, but that's super off track. There's another question in here around like grinding it out, being an engineer versus like the selling / story aspect. And my kind of response to that question is like, you got to do both all the freaking time. And it's kind of like a pendulum of how much weight you put into each one of these buckets at different points of your company life cycle. If you're like a, second time, third time founder, big successful exits, you don't even need a freaking product. You just need a great story. My guess, most of you guys here in this audience probably aren't that. So it's really about like building a great product. And then as your company gets bigger, you focus a little bit less time on building product, getting product market fit, more into selling, whether it's closing customers, closing new hires, getting funding, whatnot.
It's kind of chicken and egg though, Ryan. Like you gotta have a little bit of product to be able to talk to people. And then those people tell you built the wrong thing. So then you gotta like, there's this iterative cycle of like totally going back and around. So you kind of have to be doing both
all the time.
I would not recommend going off and building only a product without talking to any people, because you will probably build the wrong thing. But highly recommend, and I don't know that we've done this particularly well in our history, but we've always tried to do better and better at this, is to build like the very smallest possible iota of something and like try to put that out there and see what people say. So I agree with you. You have to do both, but it's chicken and egg. You need both.
I love the discussion here. Given that you're all engineers by training, I do want to ask one last question, because I know there's a lot of College of Engineering undergrad and grad students here as well, and also just folks from the industry that want to know on a day-to-day basis, what are some of the most exciting technologies that you're excited to work with? Because as engineers, a lot of your time is spent really tinkering with technology to start. We've talked all about kind of the hustling piece, the product building, the selling piece. What about the fundamental technology? What are some of the most exciting things? Obviously, I know Uris mentioned earlier that he does a lot of work with AI and high performance computing, but what are everyone's thoughts on what's most exciting to learn about going forward?
Me personally, it's like this, push towards IoT, predictive maintenance. My like quick 2 thoughts on this is like, I actually believe that writing the algorithms is like the easiest part. The most difficult part is getting the right data and the right structure. So I feel like we talk a lot about like, AI, predictive maintenance, predictive whatnot, but we don't yet have the data and the right structure. And I feel like we're kind of just coming up to the cusp of that right now. I hope. But once we do crack that code, like this whole field is going to accelerate so fast, like so incredibly fast, once we have the right data and the right structures. Anna, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, we kind of work in the same industry. So, you're probably like, you look at the back of the equipment you're plugging into, it's probably all connectors from like the 80s and 90s. So you're like, where does my lightning cable go? Getting the data. I would say the really interesting things for me are really putting, like, it is a buzzword. I'm going to use it. This whole like no code, low code, where like you can put a UI over some really complicated stuff. And all the user is like, oh, I want to do this, and then I want to do this, and I want to do this. And like, you have been able to abstract like how their brain thinks through a problem, and then build all this complicated technology in the background they don't even know they're using. And like, they don't even know, like in our product, our customers do not know that they're like training like really advanced machine learning algorithms to go and like find anomalies in their data, or they don't know that like the combinations of statistics and machine learning that are used to actually produce the results. All they're thinking about is, I need to find my problems. I need to figure out how to fix them. Like I go through this process to do that. And it's how their brain thinks. So like we've built the products the way their brain thinks, and everything in the background is a big soup of all sorts of tech. And so I think that's really interesting, that abstraction away, that you don't need to be like a machine learning engineer to be able to leverage the power of that. And I think we've seen that across other industries. And I'm really excited about that abstraction of building essentially consumer grade technology for people who don't get consumer grade technology. Essentially engineers, technical people usually get really complex knobs and buttons and stuff. And like, they just want stuff that's simple and looks like an app on your phone. Because that's how, we millennials didn't grow up that way, but that's how we prefer to live. And so, there's a whole trickle down of that to these other industries.
Eurus, any last thoughts?
Sure. I think these are all great points. I think if I was learning in school some things, I'd focus on synthetic biology, blockchain, AI, obviously very interesting. I think semiconductor chip development is still sort of underrated. It's probably sort of a lost art that now is getting very interesting again because Moore's law is slowing down. And so that's a pretty exciting space, building custom chips to be able to support some of these like software AI use cases. And then for starting companies, I mean, it's really important to solve, we already talked about solving a big problem, but I think there'll be like companies are just as hard whether you solve a small problem or a big problem, right? So like climate change is probably one of the biggest problems. I think that's an interesting area that lots of investors are willing to fund. And so, and a very big problem for the world, right? Yeah, the maybe last part I would say is like, it's good to have a very specific problem that you have domain expertise at, that you've experienced yourself to solve, but don't be afraid for that to translate into a very big vision and big problem to solve for the world. Because the startup is going to be literally pretty much just as hard, whether it's like a super big, compelling problem or just a very small, narrow problem. And
certainly help you hire people if it's big and compelling too.
That's right. So that's why for Tesla, SpaceX, et cetera, yeah, much easier. Yeah, and definitely go and entrepreneurship is great. Go start your companies.
And if you want to, of course, work at a startup, there are a ton of awesome founders that hopefully you've had a chance to learn about through our panel session today that you're very welcome to reach out to. I know Drodio started this shared doc where he's put in notes from our session together, but if any of you have additional resources as either call to action or readings that would be relevant, please feel free to put that in talk or in chat and we can make sure to follow up and get it to everyone afterwards. We did record our event, so it will be available on YouTube afterwards. And we usually have a ton of students, industry members, and faculty members tuning in afterwards as well. So hopefully we'll share the link and all of that in description for everyone afterwards too. With that, thank you guys all so much for staying past our scheduled time to share all the exciting opportunities that you're seeing in the future of work, specifically digital transformation. Really excited to see you all in person again, hopefully soon. It feels like it was a world ago since I saw you all in person.
Thank you so much, Ro. Thanks, Anna and Joris, for being part of this panel with me. And thank you everyone for joining.
Thanks so much,
Thanks,
everyone.
Ryan. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Take care.